Welcome to episode 52 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week are Jason.
Hi.
Jill.
Hello.
And Andrew.
Hello.
Well, another week has come and gone without the debut of Teargarden by Kaleidoscope, and the fans are starting to get a bit restless. On HU, Pins ran a poll about when people think the first song will be released, and the majority seem to think either by Thanksgiving or by December 14th we'll be hearing the first song. I've already gone on the record in the comments as saying I think the hold-up, if you can even call it one, is because of problems getting the online distribution set up. What about you guys? Did you have any theories? Are you guys panicking as much as some of the fans seem to be? What about you, Andrew?
I think it's a little... I'm not exactly panicking yet. Okay. I didn't vote, but I probably would have said by Thanksgiving. So I'm going to guess within either this week or the next, we'll have a song out. You know, we're living in internet time, and back in the day, get the old fogey voice on. We had to wait months for new music to come out after they finished recording, and now they've been done recording these. Just mastered these things on Monday, I guess Monday last, if I remember the schedule right. So it's not like they're just. It's not like it's an incredibly huge amount of time has passed since their mastering started on Monday, can't be quite sure if how long that whole process took or not. But
I think was there a tweet that they were done either I think on Tuesday or Wednesday we saw a tweet that they were done.
That's right. Okay, so yeah, now they're already tweeting videos of the next round of songs. So I'm sure it's a technical getting their distribution process in line, maybe a little bit more complicated than Billy expected. So I don't think we can take this delay as evidence that this project is about to, self-destruct before it ever gets off the ground. People expect things pretty quick now, and Billy did kind of build up the expectation that things would be happening soon. So people have various interpretations of soon. So.
Yeah.
Not surprising that people are getting restless.
Jason, Jill, what about you guys?
I liked, there was a commenter named Eric on Hipsters United. I liked what he said. Let me read a couple sentences here. He wrote, "This is Billy, not Trent Reznor, so of course there will be an announcement for the announcement that it's going to be released, then a big build-up and hype from the Pumpkins camp." And I agree with that. This is the first song from the album, and there's going to be some sort of promotional rollout. There's going to be a website for the album, surely, and it hasn't appeared yet, though it'll probably appear simultaneous with the song. But that means the site has to be ready. And in addition to the questions about how they're going to deliver the music, there's got to be a question of some sort of promotional rollout. Mm-hmm. I think that the distribution part is tricky. He wants to give it away for free, but most people who are Pumpkins fans are not attuned to the whole torrents or archive.org or all this stuff, or reading hipstersunited.com, a blog about the Smashing Pumpkins. You have to remember this is a band whose last album sold 500,000 copies. Mm-hmm. We do not have 500,000 readers. SmashingPumpkins.com probably doesn't have 500,000 readers. I'm sure it doesn't. I shouldn't say I'm sure it doesn't. But, there are a lot more people who are going to be interested in this free music than who are involved in these, active, talking internet communities, how many people have tweeted at Hipsters United that they want to know when the music is coming out? It's 2 or 3 people. And we're talking a million, literally probably a million times that many will download the album, I think. And so you have to reach those people, and you have to reach them in a place that they normally go to, which is not hipstersunited.com, and it's not even smashingpumpkins.com, I don't think. Someone suggested that Billy might be looking at a partnership with a major website like Amazon or something, and that makes a ton of sense to me. I don't see why he wouldn't.
Yeah. I think that was really astute, actually, because it's a way to monetize the project without actually charging people for it.
Yeah, and that's one aspect, but more than anything, that's just going to get the music to a lot more people.
Yeah.
I mean, this, I think people think, oh, it's free, that means it'll get to everyone. That's bogus. I mean, if you put it on a torrent somewhere, it's going to take a long time before it gets even to a few thousand people, just because people won't encounter it.
Well, and if it's on a torrent, there's no way for the band to track it at all. I mean, the torrent can get retorrented, and they have no control over seeing the numbers on who's downloading it or anything like that.
They might be interested in that. And
I don't think they would ever go with something like that.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, just from a pure wanting your music to be heard thing, which has always driven Billy in large extent, is getting the music heard by as many people as possible, which a lot of people usually mistake for him wanting to make a lot of money, because those two things do kind of go hand in hand. But I think getting the music heard drives him quite a bit, and so he's going to want to do. I think he should look for a partnership like Amazon.
Do any of you guys use Amazon's music service? Do they allow, or do they have free song downloads? Because I'm fairly certain that iTunes does not allow that sort of thing, just because they don't want to have to pay for the bandwidth and not get anything in return.
I've used Amazon. I don't know about free stuff on there. I mean, it would be different. I mean, I think they will have to strike some sort of unique deal if they want a site like that to host it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how much a site like that would want to pay for. I don't even, that's a weird thing, because it'd be a big expense for them to serve up 2 million downloads or whatever. So the idea that the Pumpkins are going to be the ones getting money would be, I don't know, I'd be a little surprised if that would be the way the deal would break down. But I don't really know. I don't know how the numbers work.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny, the iTunes, you can get tons of podcasts for free, but you're not actually downloading them from iTunes servers. You're downloading them from, in our instance, Hipsters United.
Right.
So,
well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Apple has no qualms about allowing free podcast downloads, but if Billy Corgan comes and says, hey, let 2 million people download this song for free, I don't think they'd be too happy about that, unless they were getting paid something in return.
Yeah, so I mean, they're gonna, maybe the Pumpkins need to arrange for the hosting themselves. I mean, I think that's the most logical thing, but that's an expense, obviously.
Yep.
It's something they haven't done. They've never tried. I mean, they have some media on SmashingPumpkins.com, but I don't think they've ever tried to serve 2 million downloads before.
No.
Do you think they'd go with a partnership with Live Nation?
Oh, his man Irving Azoff or whatever. Probably.
I don't know.
Would Irving even be interested? Billy, it's free. I don't care. Joke. I don't know anything about Irving Azoff, and I am just pulling that 2 million figure I keep saying out of my ass. So, yes, I'm just figuring 500,000 people buy Zeitgeist, then maybe 2 million would download a free album. But just total shot in the dark.
Or at least the first song, if it gets heavily promoted. I can see
yeah.
a lot of people going after that.
Without being gradually released, of course, exactly. And 2 million is probably high. I certainly don't think it would be a lot more. But you want to be prepared for success, right?
Always. Always.
Hey, then you don't want people complaining that they can't download the song once you put it out there because your server has got no bandwidth left. So,
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good situation.
That wouldn't be a good way to debut the project.
Well, last week, as previously discussed, Billy Corgan took the stage with Kerry Brown and Mark Tulin as Backwards Clock Society to help raise money for former fan club head Laura Amasora's medical bills.
Crowd.
Yeah, that's the crowd. Sorry.
The band played 4 original compositions, all previously unperformed, as well as 4 new cover songs, and comparisons by fans have ranged from the Beatles to the Pumpkins sound circa 1989 to the Pumpkins cover of Girl Named Sandoz. Jason,
The White Stripes.
Yes, true. There was also the White Stripes comparison.
Made by me.
Well, the Girl Named Sandoz, I think, was Jill,
Yep.
if I'm not mistaken.
No, Chris, her name is Jill. Oh, you just said it.
Jason, when Jimmy first announced he was leaving, I believe you speculated on the podcast that Billy's next album or batch of songs might be acoustic. And it seemed at the Spirits shows that Billy may have been leaning more in that direction, with the exception of the latter part of the set, which was definitely full band electric. But the new songs he debuted here seem to be definitely anything but acoustic. What were your impressions of the songs? Are they surefire Teargarden songs, you think, or could this be one of the side projects that Billy alluded to earlier this year when he said that he was going to be in 3 other bands?
Well, I definitely said that I thought the album would be quieter. I don't remember saying it would be acoustic.
Yep, that's true. Quieter.
Compared to Zeitgeist, I think it would be hard not to be quieter. So, I just kind of thought that was I still think that's a true statement, but maybe not much quieter, because I think you're right. I'm sorry, I maybe lost train of thought there. But,
are these Teargarden songs, you think? They're not some other side project?
I don't
Backwards Clock Society a one event only?
It has the appearance of that, but obviously we don't know. We're going into pure podcast speculation land here. I would guess Billy doesn't even know, but I would assume with a 44 song album on the horizon, of which 4 of the songs have been recorded. He's written all this other material, but Billy is no stranger to writing material for a project, getting into the project, and then writing more material that supplants some of the material he'd already written, right?
Right.
Like Melancholy, how many songs had he written, and then 1979, right? He writes at the last minute.
Right.
I think, the songs go on the Billy Corgan pile, and wherever it makes sense to fit them in or not fit them in is what he'll do. But I would say odds are everything right now is on the Teargarden table, so to speak.
Well, and we know he's already started demoing these songs in the studio. As Andrew mentioned earlier, there was a twit vid already of When the Cocks Crow, or When the Cock Crows.
That's right. I think he might still be in the stage of forgetting his own lyric. That's why he's got to get that demo down.
Quite finalized, yeah.
What about you, Jill? What did you think of the songs?
Well, if I might mirror what Jason was saying, and we'll get to this more in depth later, but I think that the pace at which he's writing right now is really rapid. He actually said yesterday in the museum interview that, he's, at least from a habitual standpoint, he typically will write songs in the morning, but he said that just the other day he sat down and wrote an entire song at 10 o'clock at night. It poured out of him. So I think Jason's totally right that everything is sort of up in the air right now, and who knows if this material will actually make it onto the album, but, it's to be determined, totally. As far as liking it, like I said, like you commented about the comparison to A Girl Named Sandoz, like, I think I'm digging this new stuff. I always do, though. It's hard for me to be too critical.
Such a fangirl, yeah.
Oh, you're one to talk.
Come on. Come on. No, it's
have long been done.
more than anything, it's just kind of fun to see them, putting these songs through their paces. Because it seems like he's clearly having fun. So, and there's a lot of new material. Like, I haven't seen anybody do a count yet of new material that has, we know has been written in the last 6 months, but it's pretty voluminous.
Yeah,
yeah, we keep getting allusions to other song titles, like we got that clip of Shadowlands from the David Byrne video.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kristen Burns pipes up to tweet, "Oh, you all are going to love this great new song, My Love is Winter."
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we ever get to hear it, hopefully we do.
Right.
So,
just to go forth with my White Stripes comparison, I don't want to make too big a deal out of it because I think it can sound like, "Ooh, he's ripping off the White Stripes, man." But it also, in addition to sounding kind of like the White Stripes, it also seems like the continuation of a thread in some of Billy's work since the start of Zwan, because he kind of started, occasionally lurching into this sort of bluesy territory with Jesus or whatever, and then some other songs in the Zwan songbook, and then on his solo tour he had those those covers like Johanna and I'm a King Bee that got into that sort of same territory that When the Cocks Crow mines. But so, in one sense, it does seem like an extension of those previous Billy works, and in another sense, it reminds me of Jack White, which is totally fine with me. So.
Well, this past Saturday, Billy Corgan took part in an event at the Rubin Museum of Art in New York, where he had a dialogue with Jungian analyst Morgan Stebbins on Carl Jung's Red Book. And HU's own Jill attended the event, so I will give way to you, Jill, for a full report.
Woo! That's me, HU's own Jill. So, I feel like it's taken me a little bit of time to actually digest the event because it was pretty. I don't want to sound like I'm gloating by any means, but it was a really fascinating event. And you know, of all of the concerts and interviews I've seen, and you know, read, and all these different venues with which we use, you know, to understand, or that we use to understand Billy Corgan's thoughts and dreams, and probably more than we should ever want to know about him. That was kind of like this event. It was pretty bizarre. So the whole premise of this series, and there have been loads of other celebrities and artists, and you know, even Sarah Silverman took part in this series already, and David Byrne is doing next week. There's a famous painter doing it this Wednesday. The whole premise of all of these people dialoguing at the Rubin Museum is to explore Carl Jung's Red Book. And Carl Jung was, you know, I hope I'm not going to reduce this down too far, but this is only my feeble interpretation of what this book represents to the psychology community. Carl Jung was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, and they were, from what I understand, quite close until Sigmund Freud kind of discounted Jung's work, and they had a break, both as a friendship and as a, I guess, academic partnership or colleague relationship. And from what I understand, Jung took this extremely hard. So he actually, some people think that he induced a psychotic break in his own personality at the end of his career in order to further explore his theories of collective unconscious. Right? So that was his whole, you know, much of his life's work was studying this collective unconscious of how humanity has these sort of base principles of psychology and base allegorical understandings of how the world works and how culture works and so forth and so on. And Carl Jung was kind of, you know, he was really interested in reducing that down to sort of imagery and allegorical understanding. So he essentially some people believe that he made himself go crazy in order to further tap into this theory that he had. And as part of that, he created this, I think it took him like 15 years to create this giant book of all of these paintings that represent certain life crises and life experiences that humanity goes through. And if you're still following along after that crazy explanation by a total amateur, the whole purpose of these events was to show one of these images to the featured guest and basically have them free associate around how they, how it made them feel, what it made them think of, what experiences in their life relate to this particular image. And the event was proctored by a very capable psychoanalyst who has, credentials upon credentials upon credentials from Columbia and Berkeley and so forth and so on. He was actually quite a good conversationalist, this Morgan Stebbins. So hopefully that's enough background about what the event was. the audience there was like a really mixed bag. You know, I thought for sure that there would be a bigger contingency of fans, but it actually wasn't. It was, you know, a lot of sort of museum patrons and artistic types and psychology academics, and then, you know, a solid contingency of people that, you know, admire Billy Corgan. So that made for like a pretty interesting conversation, because at the end of the event they opened it up to questions. So they people probably asked like 10 to a dozen questions, maybe more, maybe less. So there were some very like specific psychological questions, as well as, you know, sort of what I would say kind of made me cringe a little bit at first, and then realized they were quite good fan questions. So,
can you give an example?
I'll try. There's one in particular that turned into a very insightful understanding of his songwriting process. So I like basically word vomited to Jason last night when I got home from the event, because trying to like reduce all of this down into something that makes sense to communicate to you guys is kind of crazy. So I'll tell you that story in a little bit. The beginning of the event, basically, you know, they gave him this red book, and he opened it after a little bit of trepidation, and it was this huge image that they projected on the museum wall of an Egyptian-style boat with eyes on the front of it that had a circular Egyptian sun symbol in the middle. And you can see, I'll post pictures of this on HU and on my Flickr and on SP.com. But it had this huge sun symbol in the middle with a, you know, kind of like a hangman or a boat driver at the back that looked like, you know, an ominous figure. And it was heading in this one direction, and beneath it, in like this torrential ocean mass, was a giant fish with teeth. And so when Billy like opened up the book, it was kind of fun. It was kind of amusing to like get his initial reaction, just because like, what the heck would you do in that situation as well? But, you know, he instantly made comments about his relationship as a Pisces and his sort of astrological viewpoints about how the fish sort of represents both his power and his shadow in life. You know, it kind of follows him, and it's a dangerous thing. He also talked a bit about, you know, how it makes him think of death and the inevitability of this boat voyage on, you know, whether it's the river Sphinx or the river Hades or whatever, you know, whatever this water represents. So essentially he was kind of, you know, drawn to its mortality. And so Morgan Stebbins kind of like walked him through a deeper analysis of this and of why he related to the image that way. But, you know, after the sort of initial free association came on, it started to get kind of wacky. And he talked, you know, he made several jokes during the session, like, well, you have to send me the bill, I'd be honored to pay it, because it was really a psychoanalysis, which I've never witnessed before. And so one of the first comments that he made when he was first sort of free associating on this image was that he actually had a conversation, he said, recently with his stepmother, talking about how when he was a child, he had lots of teachers approach his stepmother and ask her to persuade him to stop staring at them. Like he, you know, basically complaining that he was a very intense child, that he possessed some sort of an intensity that sort of scared them. And so he grew up with this understanding that he was sort of, you know, his natural instincts made people uncomfortable. So he said that as kind of a growing process out of that, it's come to represent, or he's come to realize that he mirrors people very well, for better or for worse. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why he feels like he projects himself onto this image of the Pisces because it is both a threat and sort of this an innocuous water symbol that kind of means life and birth and so forth and so on. And, bear with me because I don't know astrology very well, but whatever. He also told a few stories about why he thinks that mirroring impulse is the reason that his critics both love and hate him. So, the ability to show people whether, themselves either makes you love him, like, you understand me and you get my lyrics and you saved my life and blah, 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 or it really elicits this reaction like, what's wrong with you? Get off the stage, you're terrible. So he kind of stated pretty early on that he's never appealed to the masses, or he thinks he's never appealed to the masses because of this capacity to mirror. And he went on to say, he went on to talk a little bit about the allegorical dreams that he's had too, and hopefully I think that WNYC was their recording, so I'm really hopeful that everybody gets to hear this via a podcast, because it might be kind of dry, but it's really interesting to hear him talk about some of this, and he tells of some of his crazy dreams, like I guess he has this recurring dream where he falls out of the sky in a plane and, it crashes, but no one's hurt and it's submerged in mud. And he goes and, he's in a giant field and he goes into a house that's submerged in mud and he meets a corn man that has giant kernels of corn for skin with hairs coming out of it, and apparently he's met other people that have the same allegorical dream, and within the context of this conversation, Morgan Stebbins actually said that within the Red Book, Carl Jung has a drawing like that, like a painting of a corn-like man, that so there was some like weirdo, what would he call them, vibrational moments at this at this event, mostly all relating back to what he perceives as the shadows that follow him around that he has to confront. So that was, there was a lot of sort of psychobabble that was interesting, was also questionable, was, but he seemed to be very into it and very interested and kind of exploring how his own psychological state has impacted his life and those around him. I guess he sees, he talked about his therapist in Chicago and working through some of these issues as well. But where it got really interesting, at least for me as a fan and for some of, some of the other folks in the room talking about his music and his songwriting process, because he used sort of that shadow metaphor to represent what kind of motivates him to be who he's essentially decided he is or was endowed. I guess, so this is probably where it would be good to tell this story about the fans' question. Once they opened it up to questions, lots of people's hands shot up. They were really, eager to ask him questions. One fan was asking about basically how do I pose it? He used a couple of lyrics from Melancholy to illustrate a question about how Billy writes songs and deals with sort of his destiny in life. He specifically cited, the world is a vampire lyric, and as well as the more you change, the less you feel. And he was asking, at that point I was like kind of cringing, but he followed it up with basically the question of, well, you've said that you appeal to sort of these fringes, people either really love you or they really hate you. But in some instances, you've had these moments where you really do appeal to the entire mainstream, These two lyrics are kind of samples of where you've really appealed and really resonated with contemporary American culture. And he basically said that, those moments are kind of happenstance because of his songwriting process and of how he works. Apparently, he specifically used The World is a Vampire as an example of, well, when I sit down, or at that moment, when I sat down to play my guitar, that's just what came out. I didn't think about it. It came from an empty vessel. It was just inspiration. I didn't think anything more about it. And for some reason, that became this huge hit. And doesn't it mean that, he was sort of resonating, his allegory or his metaphor at the time was really resonating with contemporary culture. And it really, just happened to be a coincidence per his songwriting process. And vice versa, he said that, in some cases, these lyrics actually are a process of growing for him. That when he's writing songs, he's actually working through the growth of the moment. And that in the case of The More You Change, The Less You Feel, he would never use that again, ever. He said that as soon as he wrote that, he was just flying past that moment in his life. He was just trying to, deal with it and move on and just barrel his way through what his inner creative inspiration was driving him to write. So he was really thoughtful. I mean, we know he's thoughtful, and we know he takes a lot of time to compose things and to talk about things, but he was quite thoughtful about how he described his songwriting process. And he also mentioned that, in some cases, kind of like with this newly found Carl Jung book that could have been released about 70 years ago, but never was, that he's found as his career progresses, that sometimes people just aren't ready for his work. It's sometimes when you're an artist, you want people to immediately connect with your work, but you have to realize that in some cases, the culture is not ready, it's not the right time, you're too early, you're too late. You have to recognize sort of the inevitability that will happen. And he cited this example, in Melancholy, he was spot on. Those particular songs resonated with this huge culture. Zeitgeist, not so much. There's this differential between what he's putting out and with the contemporary culture, as well as the sort of pace of technology to keep up with. He described, as we've seen him say before, at one time it used to be an album world. Now it's a single world. You're just writing that single for the moment. It's your single against my single. And whoever's is best wins, whatever that means. And he used the example of the beginning is the end is the beginning as an example of when he wrote something that at the time he felt was right, but had absolutely no reaction from anyone. Literally, he said that not a single person had ever spoken to him about the beginning is the end is the beginning before it was released on the Watchmen trailer. That, people talked about, Siamese Dream is so great, Melancholy is so great, this, that, the other, the beginning is the end, or the end is the beginning is the end is good, but never ever that song. And so when he released it for the trailer and it kind of shot to popularity and it was downloading, they were making money off of it, it was everywhere, for him that was positive reinforcement that what his initial creative energy was telling him was right. It was an instance of where the timing was totally wrong. So he's, and I don't know, as I was listening to that, I was thinking, well, is this justification or is this truly like an example of where artistic pursuit may not match cultural, I hate to say relevance, but, or cultural readiness. It was quite provocative, I thought. And he spoke kind of later on about how this empty vessel approach that he uses to kind of channel his musical creativity at some points in his life is actually, he's turned that off. And he used this metaphor that when he learned, when he was a child, he had to learn how to turn that on. He became the master of talking around issues and talking around, communicating around what he was really feeling because he was an abused child. If you say what's on your mind, you get your ass kicked. But so he became this master of and he literally said that, you become this master of trying to contextualize your work within a frame that is non-threatening and or sort of vague or tangential, I guess.
So Billy is a Straussian? Is that what we're...
Maybe. I mean, he didn't specifically use that word, and hopefully there will be a podcast to prove what I'm saying. But he once he succumbed to that sort of energy to use what he was feeling and channel it into this creative outlet in music, that it really provoked this huge response of emotional feedback. So, whether it was critics saying, "Oh, you're great," fans saying, "Oh, you're great," or other people saying, "Oh, you're terrible," it was this torrential outpouring of emotion, both from him and to him. And he said that, at some points in his life, he's actually turned that off. I think he used a spigot sort of metaphor. He said that he turned the spigot to a drip when it was like 1999, 2000, and he was writing Machina, that the meaningfulness and the authenticity sort of started dribbling. It was intentional, and at that moment, the outpouring of emotion sort of backlashed, and it basically became, a hellish situation where his relationships weren't working, his professional work wasn't, it wasn't meaningful or authentic, or I wouldn't say meaningful or authentic, but it just changed his very essence of how he worked and how he was perceived and how he was interacting with the world around him. And that's since changed, he kind of learned from that. And basically, as part of that process, has learned that, well, when it's good, but when it's bad and the critics are calling you, a washed up has-been, and it's, why are you still doing this? What's wrong with you? Why would you ever try to keep on creating? Just hang it up, et cetera, et cetera. You can't listen to that, because what's happening is that the critics are basically trying to take away from him the fact that he's achieved his dreams. He has to be confident in the fact that he's meant to be a musician. He's achieved his dreams, and people are basically hating on that. So if he has any sort of fortitude to continue on with what he believes he is meant to do in life, he has to basically ignore that and recognize that anyone who is putting so much effort into berating him for what he does for a living really doesn't have anything by which they can define themselves. They're defining their work or themselves by criticism of him, as opposed to, well, what are you putting out into the world? And he said he felt that really strongly when he put out his book of poetry, which everyone, many people in the audience were very excited when he talked about his poetry. I was sort of surprised by that. I think it was I think in New York, at least, it was well received among the artistic community, even beyond his music. I think at the time, I believe he was living here when he released that book, and did quite a bit of press and publicity here, and it seemed to get quite a good reception at this event, even, 7-8 years later. And so the last question, and one of the ones I think most pertinent to what we constantly talk about at HU, whether our readers like it or not, is about that criticism. The last person to ask a question asked about the book of poetry, and basically, said, well, how did you feel about how the book was received? Is that analogous to how you feel your music is received? And Billy talked pretty frankly about how a lot of journalists and poetry critics basically asked him to his face or told him, "You're not a poet. Why are you doing this?" And yet he was reading Oscar Wilde or Yeats and was realizing that many of his rhyme schemes were the same, much of his content was similar, but that people just weren't ready to accept that that's where he wanted to go with his work at the time. Initially it was met by self-doubt, am I just a lyricist, am I just a musician, or do I basically define who I am and by what I do and what I put out there, and be confident that represents me as appropriately as who I am. Like I was saying, he basically observed that when people who had the biggest bones to pick, whether or not he was a poet or not a poet or this or that or the other, they were generally the people who had least actualized themselves and who they were, so that he had to kind of learn to let go. He's had to learn to let go over time of this driving force to be a peacemaker, to try and reconcile, the fact that he really wants people to like him with, this is what I do, and for some reason I polarize, so it is this same sort of inherent contradiction within his personality that drives him to do what he believes in, but also provokes this intense response. That was just a long diatribe about the event. Do you guys have, it would be better to ask questions of me if you have any. It was really fascinating. So.
Did you get to talk to Billy at all outside of the event after it was over or anything?
No, we got there and I did some photography, so I kind of had to get in and get a space, and we didn't really stick around. I think he did stick around with people after the event, and maybe a bit before. There was a bit of a crowd, but we were kind of in and out of there. So, got places to be, man.
I'm struck by the extent to which, when I listen to what you're saying, Jill, I'm struck to the extent that Billy is kind of, who knows which way this goes, but he's kind of equating or correlating the commercial success he's enjoyed with any sort of, personal expression success. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The way you characterize it's kind of like, Machina was, some kind of failure on his part and all this stuff. And when I think of what I think of Machina, I think of Machina as a very audience confrontational record that could never have sold well. But also, it's almost a record you can't really go on stage in New York 10 years later and say, well, you guys realize, of course, that the reason that didn't sell is because it was kind of a screw you record.
Yeah.
So I just...
That's why I say, it's like, was it a justification, or is it truly a genuine self-reflection?
Yeah, I don't know if I can... But, is he... How could he ever even make that statement, Mm-hmm. I'm not here telling people that Machina is the greatest album of all time or anything, but I think it's a good record. But it's definitely this kind of confrontational record, and it shouldn't have sold well, but I don't think that necessarily makes it a failure. And so, but it kind of sounds like he's saying, yeah, you people are right, you didn't buy it, and yeah, I was in a bad place. On some level, I'm sure he was in a bad place, but I'm sure on other levels he was in a fine place,
Well, we know he was in a bad place when writing some of his other albums that were successful.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it was a good bad place when he was writing Siamese Dream, but a bad bad place when he was doing Machina. Damn it, Damn the luck.
Well, he also... Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead.
I think he was also... He came back quite often to this idea of projectioning, which is a psychological principle that I'm not 100% familiar with, but basically how we project ourselves and our aspirations and dreams onto other people, and how they kind of do the same thing to us. And from what I understood, he has always felt he does that because of these sort of deep-seated complaints he got as a child, and, you know, how he's always kind of been this very intense person. It's made him project in different ways throughout his career, and we can obviously see it based on his stage personas and all sorts of stuff. But he ultimately talked about, you know, how this has impacted his personal relationships, and I think his personal relationships, particularly in 99, 2000, were very difficult. You know, he talked not extensively, but on multiple occasions he talked about how miserable he was living in New York, in what he called a terrible relationship, an awful relationship for him, which I'm assuming is Yelena. And the person that he lived with in New York, that's what he referenced, and how difficult it was to strip away all of the projectioning pretenses at that time. And that's always been sort of his, what he called shadow, kind of like the fish is a shadow in this Carl Jung metaphor, that he finds it's easy to find plenty of people and engage in relationships with plenty of people who think they know what he wants, but do not know what he needs or can't give him what he needs. And that's always sort of cursed him in his relationships and in some of these instances where his music and musicianship has been challenged, which I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, he was pretty open about that. Trying to remember anything specific, anything more specific that he talked about with that. He sort of used the analogy that, you know, when, and was aided in some part by Morgan Stebbins, you know, when man was still interested in astrology and the projection of these human characteristics on the stars and the drama of the stars, you know, we were projecting our hopes and desires and dreams and fears on this imaginary cast of characters in the celestial bodies. But, you know, as time progressed and technology progressed, those sort of gods and goddesses came closer to Earth, in that, you know, the film star, like the early film stars and the early movie stars and the early television stars were sort of revered as these, you know, classic beauties with attainable acting talent and singing talent and this and that and the other. But now it's sort of like progressed to where people like Billy Corgan or people, you know, like Paris Hilton possess this projectioning ability among the general public. So, you know, his fans project their needs and desires on him, think that he's huggable. He even said that. He was like, you know, people think that I'm like mommy or daddy, or I can give them what they need in a romantic relationship, but really what's happening is all of this projectioning that people are trying to fill in their own holes with something else rather than deal with them. And he actually talked about, you know, this is at the point he was talking about his sort of failed relationships and some of the challenges he's had with relationships. He said that he's taken to, and I thought this was quite funny, to actually having really, like, infantile conversations in relationships. Like, I want to talk to the 4-year-old in you. I don't want to talk to the person that wants to, you know, be with a famous person that you know, blah, 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 that projects everything they want and desire, but I want to talk to the little kid in you that wants to be protected and comforted and wants everything that, you know, a little 4-year-old wants. It was a very strange, like, it was a very strange conversation to witness when he spoke about some of his relationships, because I think he's had a variety of experiences that have really shaped him, both romantically and, you know, friendship-wise. And I'm assuming that these types of exercises probably also applied with band members. But that's kind of a funny thought. A la the Viewphoria tapes, perhaps. But
Well, it sounds like an interesting event. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast and talking so much about it.
of course, sorry if I bored anyone.
No, it was great to hear a first-hand account of it, and hopefully, like you say, we'll get to hear the official podcast version of it released, so we can all hear it firsthand ourselves.
Yeah, I mean that was cool. But I'm also like hesitant to start really diving into it without, hearing what Billy said himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like the disclaimer is totally that this is how I extrapolated the conversation. So
Yeah, that's still cool to hear.
Yep. To wrap things up this week, Jason has something to say about a music critic, and it's probably not what you think. Jason, take it away.
Oh, I forgot we were going to do this. Well, Jill and I, and whatever, but among the, we read lots of music criticism as part of doing Hipsters United, and we both, one of our favorites is a woman named Maura Johnston, who writes for Idolator, which is a part of Gawker, the Gawker Empire, which of course is widely viewed as a snarky outpost on the internet. But Jill and I both thought Maura Johnston did a great job writing about pop music for Gawker's Idolator website, but somehow she is no longer working there as of last week, and the announcement of it made by Maura herself was very professional, and of course left it ambiguous as to what exactly happened. So we don't know in that very professional way. But Idolator has continued on with a couple of new writers who don't seem very impressive, frankly. But anyway, the whole episode I read Idolator every day. I enjoyed it, and in a way that I enjoy not a whole lot of music writing.
to say the least.
And so it just it was kind of a moment of, man, of all the music writers to take away from me, why take away one of the ones I really like, it just, and so I went and it just was kind of a moment for reflection. Well, why do I like Maura Johnston's writing? What is it about what she does and what some of these other sites that I've brought in for criticism on Hipsters United? What I was just trying to get at it, and I just had a couple thoughts, and I just figured I'd throw them out, and people can react and see what they make of them, because this stuff is deep. I mean, it's hard to tease out, and it's hard to understand, and without having a whole Red Book dialogue about it, I just thought I'd toss a couple of notions out and see if they ring true to people. But I mean, I get the sense so much when I'm reading, the indie type, the sites with the indie music mindset like Stereogum and Pitchfork. Not, this doesn't apply to everyone who writes for the sites, but, there's kind of a predominant mindset, and I often feel that there's just an intense sort of status competition thing going on, and I think it has to do with how the critics view themselves. Any writer, I think, your identity as a writer, what with regard to the subject matter you're writing about, how you perceive your own identity, kind of shapes the tone you take. And I think there's a lot of music critics that, I'm going to suggest like 4 identity types that you might adopt as someone who writes about music. And the first 2 are, I've labeled them musician or cool person, right? And I think in both of those identity types, if you're writing about music thinking of yourself as a musician, or you're writing about music thinking of yourself as a really cool person, you sort of are inevitably drawn into a sort of adversarial, peer, rival type relationship with star musicians that you write about. As a musician, you think, oh, I'm not good. That's just like a natural thing to think, is to be comparing your music against their music in your mind, right? Mm-hmm. And also, if you think of yourself as a really hip, cool person, you're someone who's a cool person in the culture, i.e. a star, is someone you're going to be like, that's kind of a rival cool person. I'm as cool as they are, that sort of thing. And I really think, certain critics, that just comes out. There's a sort, and that's the sort of, as anyone can guess, like, I think it's something that is, in the writing I don't tend to like, I see this sort of attitude, right? That, for example, Tom Bryhan, who writes for Pitchfork, I think he thinks of himself as this incredibly cool person. If you go to Tom Bryhan's Twitter account, his bio says something like, "If you had it like me, you would do it like me." I mean, it's this total like attitudinal, like, I'm badass, you know? And I think he thinks he's as cool as his favorite stars, and that he's much cooler than musicians that he thinks sucks, you know? I think it just resounds throughout Tom Bryhan's writings that he thinks he's like immensely cooler than Billy Corgan, and that it's very important to him that we understand that. And I find that it's not that I am free of status competition impulses. I'm not at all, but I don't necessarily want to read about the status conflict between Tom Bryhan and Billy Corgan, you know. And so, okay. So anyway, enough about that. But so those are two possible identity types as a musician and cool person. But then I would contrast those two with two others that I thought of, which you might label. One would be journalist, and another one would be fan, right? And obviously I think, we overtly self-identify on hipstersunited.com as fans, right? We are writing from the standpoint of Smashing Pumpkins fans openly, right? And, you know, so that's one. I think we're adopting sort of a fan identity in our relationship to the writing we do. And, you know, another possible identity is just kind of a generic journalist identity, right? That you're curious about the world, you interview people as subjects, you know, but there's not so much I'm hoping people can understand the difference. Like, if you're a journalist covering a musician, you don't, what I'm saying is you don't immediately have this intense, like, status competition radar going up inside you, you know? They don't do what you do, right? You're a journalist, they're a musician, so their competence at music or their popularity, you know, is not necessarily perceived as a threat to you, right? I mean, does that sort of make sense?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so Maura Johnston strikes me as a journalist first, primarily. You know, I don't think she thinks of herself as a musician. I don't think she is really determined to be the most popular person at the nightclub either. You know, when I read her work, I just sense a sort of curiosity about musicians, right? I mean, when she
how it's all connected.
They're a person and she's a person, and of course, any two people there is some level of like status anxiety or whatever going on, but you know, it's just less when you don't think of yourself as being in the same profession or fighting for the same hipster status or whatever, right? Not hipster, but you know what I mean. And so when she writes about Kanye West, you know, a lot of people writing about some Kanye West episode, and they're like, "Oh, Kanye is crazy, man. Like, he's not as sane or whatever as I am, right? I'm actually as cool as Kanye West. I'm probably cooler than Kanye West, you know." And when I read, you know, Maura's work, it's kind of like, hey, people, you know, she's writing things like, hey, people, why are we getting so worked up about Kanye West making a scene at the MTV Music Awards? Really not that big a deal. You know? Like, she's got a much wider perspective. She doesn't, and I think it comes from not immediately trying to, like, see herself as a peer of these musicians, right? I mean, there's just not this, like, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm really going deep into the psychology of this stuff, and I'm not trying to, like, say, this is the answer, this is the key, but, I mean, you know, if you read two different music writers and you like one and you don't like the other, you know, it's a legitimate venue for exploration, I think, as to why that is, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I enjoy this sort of relaxed writing that has a broader perspective and it isn't necessarily like, I mean, it's just that sort of competitive anxiety vis-a-vis these musicians is not as palpable. And you know, the effort to tear them down is not as palpable. You know, there's the question, instead of becoming a relative status thing, these writers that I like tend to raise questions about, you know, like a tide that could lift or lower all boats, right? It's like a question about our society generally. Like, what is the Kanye West episode? How could we all deal with it in a better way, right? And a better way would just be to say, you know, Kanye gets a little silly sometimes, but it's the MTV Music Awards. Let's not all lose our shit, right? Like, that's a way of thinking of how we all can be better, right? Versus, haha, Kanye's crazy, I'm not crazy. You know, because I'm sitting here evaluating Kanye is crazy, clearly that I'm, by implication, stating that I am not crazy, and therefore I am better than Kanye West in this aspect, right? So do you see what I'm talking about? Like this internal, like, competitive against another person thing, and then this sort of take a step back, broader perspective, how can we all do better? Thing. Like Kanye could have done his thing better, we could react to it better, you know, in a more calm fashion, that sort of way. And, you know, that's the sort of perspective Maura Johnston consistently brought to her writing, and other writers that I appreciate like her do, you know, so anyway, just some thoughts.
Well, Billy actually talked about this a bit yesterday, not Maura Johnston specifically, but insofar as sort of what he sees as the coming exhaustion with these sort of extreme behaviors in society, whether it be the celebrity TMZ style coverage, or people trying, you know, music critics, other news writers, Fox News, you know, any other venue that is promoting extreme headlines. You know, that he thinks that there's this irresponsibility with doing that, but also a general populace exhaustion with reading that. And I think that, you know, hopefully we'll see people more, you know, less marginalized and more drawn to this type of analytical sensibility, because I tend to agree with that. It's exhausting. It's much more pleasurable to read someone like Maura, because it's thoughtful as opposed to knee-jerk. You know, Corgan used the example of when Michael Jackson died, that within moments, you know, 7 minutes within posting on CNN.com, people were making jokes in the comments. And it's this sort of disrespect and irresponsibility for dealing with the news and with culture and with what we consume on a daily basis that is driving, I guess, I don't know, the ostracization of thoughtful discourse. I tend to kind of agree with that. But then, you know, then I think of movies like, what's the, Idiocracy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where we're getting days closer to the House of Representatives.
I'm not so pessimistic on that.
Well, I think, you know, you have to dig through a lot of crap in order to get good stuff out there. You really do. And it is sad that Maura is no longer writing for Idolator, but I'm sure she will find some other place where her talents are very highly valued.
That's right. Maura has other gigs. She sometimes talks on NPR, so I'm sure she's on to bigger and better. But yeah, what they replaced her with is, at least judging from the first week, it's back to Gawker type snark, and just, you know, there's no self-awareness. There's no self there. You know, it's just like, look at this supposedly cool, famous person, but they're screwing up. So, you know, it's just like, who are you? Like, why should I take seriously what you say? Like, you know, you probably tripped on the front steps this morning. You know, I mean, I'd rather see someone calm and a little more. I mean, you know, the question is not whether someone has erred or not, because we all err. The question is, what's a serious error? You know, what's something worth talking about? You know, what's something worth really addressing and trying to deal with? You know, I mean, when people massively screw up, we got to talk about that. But when people screw up on a scale that's really minor, we need to look in the mirror and let it go. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us this week. As usual, you can leave comments at hipstersunited.com. And our closing song of the week is Tom Tom from Los Angeles, California on November 8th, 2009. Good night, everybody.
Vocal, please. 1, 2, 1, 2. Farther down along the range, where the wise ones kept at bay, those that wish secrets stay secrets for morning nights. I tell myself it's where I belong, among the waves and the dead and gone, with my ancestors' drums. Here comes the morning man, he's gonna tell you where you stand, gonna try to undertake what's falling. He's calling you. Here comes the morning man, he's here and yes he can penetrate the veils that you're holding, unfolding you. Sha-la-la-la. This side of the solstice band, well, autumn shows its truthful end, is when I want to empty, scare the precious stars of morning prayers. I tell myself it's who you are, and open soul on a distant star, listening for those bells. Here comes the morning man, he's here and yes he can penetrate the veils that you're holding, unfolding. Here comes the morning man, he's gonna tell you where you stand, gonna try to undertake what's falling. He's calling you. Sha-la-la-la. Here comes the morning man. Sha-la-la-la. Here comes the morning man. He's watching, unfolding. Here comes the morning man. Here comes the morning man. He's watching.
The Hipsters United podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Smashing Pumpkins, Virgin Records, or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.